I am very delighted to introduce Laynie Browne today, a writer of many talents and many books, most recently in Garments Worn by Lindens, Periodic Companions, and the Book of Moments. She has published 13 collections of poems and 3 novels. In addition, she co-edited the anthology I'll Drown My Book, Conceptual Writing by Women, and is currently finishing another very large editing project, A Forest on Many Stems, Essays on the Poet's Novel. This is a truly tremendous undertaking of 560 pages of fairly short essays on the poet's novel, defined by Laynie as, quote, a refusal to choose one form over another and an adamant acceptance of the possibility of a singular form forged by dual impulses. I have the happy memory of spending several years of knowing Laynie when she lived in Seattle, and we both participated in the Subtext Collective. As a group of experimental writers in the late 1990s, we were by size very small, by ambition very large, and despite differences amongst ourselves that in a national scene might have created irreparable differences, we really stuck together. I knew Laynie when she published her first book, Rebecca Letters, and had her first child, Benjamin. When I knew Laynie, she was talking about writing her novels. I was a little surprised at the time by her insistence that what I thought was her poetry, or perhaps her prose poetry, were her novels. But I can now see what she meant. By way of introducing Laynie, I have thought of the many different writings of hers and how sometimes they find themselves in one book and sometimes they tangle together. However, for the purpose of introducing her, I will draw them out separately. There is the Laynie of subliminal perception as it crosses over into knowledge. There is the Laynie of naming as it crosses over into politics and ethics. And there is the Laynie of the fable as it crosses over into the poet's novel. There are other Laynies as well, but I thought 3 were quite enough for an introduction. The Laynie of subliminal perception as it crosses over into knowledge was the first Laynie I met, a writing that is very present in the Rebecca Letters and throughout later works. In reviewing a relatively early book, The Drawing of a Swan Before Memory, I wrote that Browne repeatedly asked her reader to go to the place of newly forming perceptions before they harden into determinate sense. Her poems transpire through subliminal states that can become uncanny as Browne perennially skirts the familiar. This writing leads her to lines such as, "This is where we are walking between language which has not been counted," or "Please cut words only by hand or mouth." Then there is the Laynie of naming as it crosses over into politics and ethics from her more recent book, Envelop Me. We have so many beginnings and now middles and middling. If girlhood is a beginning and maidenhood a middle art, what of the wife in midwifery, cloaked and hooded for her urgent walk across the moor to an expectant mother, or to birth an opposite crossing. Then there is the Laynie of fable as it crosses over into the poet's novel. Take her novel, The Ivory Hour, a future memoir, which would seem to envelop the novel as if the novel itself were a character and a plot. She writes, text consumes something as it enters and later becomes what it dreams. Dream is the other garment of time. Letters or character are also postulates which, in various sequences, may send a message. And we are all latecomers to the future. So, Laynie.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jean. I'm really grateful for that. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Okay. So I just wanted to say thank you to Jean and to Ray and to everybody who's here and who's been at any of the Enclave readings, because for me, this has really been a space where I can turn up and feel at home in the words, in the works of everybody here. And I'm just really grateful for that and for being together now. And I also just want to say, I hope everybody is feeling safe and healthy and connected to each other and finding some energy in poetry. So I'm going to read in two parts. I'm going to read mostly from a new manuscript, which is almost done. It's called Practice Has No Sequel. And this book follows my book Practice of a few years ago. And it's very similar in form and content. It's a series of short prose poems that are really investigating just being and contemplative practice. And this book is one in a series of books that I'm calling my homage texts, which are books that were written for particular writers, women writers whose lives really inspired mine. So In Garments Worn by Lindens was one, the most recent one that came out for Rosemary Waldrop. And this book is for Leslie Scalpino. And she's been a lot on my mind. And also when Jean mentioned A Forest on Many Stems, the anthology to which many of the contributors are here right now in this space, the title is from her, A Forest on Many Stems. So I'll be reading from that. And then I'm going to read briefly from a new novel that's pretty embryotic. So without further ado, from Practice Has No Sequel. This sentence speaks to the green promise of 9:31 a.m. untethered, here, now, with no plan, though lists remain long. Laborious small selves line up, erroneously thinking themselves alone. I must allow nothingness, breathing into and out of one letter of the alphabet, followed by rib, thread, sepal. Sound encircles sternum, eye. Minuscule adornments follow the invisible and curtail only veneer. Birth increases thoracic sky, where the unseen is the brightest realm and requires no language. I wrote the word practice. Might I write a sequel now upon loss, again stunned? Practice has no sequel. Premise, right into the present moment and the space between letters, including all possible permutations, summon, care, wrapped, and art. I sit in realization kitchens, bare prose. For instance, one need not believe every thought. I set out to clear a passage to detach from narratives. First, to listen, turn up fronds of hidden, circling, ulterior landscapes. What does self say to self? If thoughts are clouds, changeless self sky contains, though does not identify. Do not seek to vanquish thin layers of tulle, glossy mists. Instead, address surroundings as opaque, feathery, in any terms, so long as I am not that. Why didn't someone separate the two entwined strands? Perfidy, treacherous to defrock from rose, strangled, trace intruders to ground, cull a confident blade, cut first, then detangle. The story of a changeless self is separate. I do not pardon, nor do I deny affliction. A procession of caskets filled with tears is cold, and then follows the story of a changeless self is separate. Timeless aspect remains unblemished. Coil strands into spirals and pin with clear crystal. Changeless self accompanies the solitary with impossibility of being alone. I climbed out from newly dug earth, removed the soiled garments of promise. They would be buried with nothing inside them. I taught myself not to mistake absence for honesty, not to follow the shadow which runs like the murderer in every ballad, any form lacking content or compass. Why would I expect anyone to make the separation apparent? Perforations between worlds may be subtle, yet my written self glimpsed pinholes, versions of a life in which walls did not constrict. My mistake is the same as asking, why did no one point me toward my own divinity, place a mirror in my skull? Why did I not believe my own non-visual reflection? Every lake looking back in guise of dream or visitation of flight. Current moment, nowhere else to go. Left shoulder is shy. Language accumulates, yet this space of speech is less than a fictive cousin to experience. I must learn to read bodies. Come back inside green fitting harp. My problems are escorts. They do not exist. We try to wield our way home, wend and yield a lane less alone. At the end of one telling, I came across a labyrinth, detached like a discarded chrysalis, and was finally able to see, in part, and to wander. Yet, this secret I wish to befriend does not exist in language or compass, is not to locate any other, but to replenish the invisible. When I allow nothing to billow, I return to a map of time we only mention as ceremonialists, fluently enter open air beneath sheets of fabrics outspread with ropes between trees in leaf-drenched pavilions. One who clings to wreckage, phrase, and tatters, nothing is diminished of essence. Harm was inflicted on a story, misconstrued. Everything and its opposites join hands. Our shadows walk ahead of us, tilt toward the possible. I searched for a sentence to repeat in peril, a sentence immune to flares of memory or invented daggers. This sought sentence transports me to a series of oracles, absolute volition, regardless of circumstance, unscathed by relentless uncertainty or misfortune. So many sentences are not the sentence I can say to myself in an attempt to lean toward equanimity while not avoiding sorrow. Is a walk through blighted fields an encounter with blindness? If I am not here regarding the actual, which has never yet occurred and is not repeatable, then aren't I missing a series of pressing moments, each precisely vast, if attended? Now I've stumbled on ancient thresholds real not only in mind. How does this happen? Stillness translates concepts to essence. A butterfly circles the body. A red fox pauses and looks into my eyes. Yesterday, I spoke with a bird and several hemlock trees adorning a roadside whose pendulous depths nod blue shade. Today, I've found a sentence, pulled it over my head, listened to the rush of language, falls in waves over face and torso. Syllables brush knees, graze floors, delicate tracery of sky. The sentence is weightless contour, follows closely, detaches easily. These words belong to any attempting return, to altar and solace, to residents of now. Let another run away with false concepts, carried untold distances. The essential I never enters another's false story. Citharism is the sound of wind through trees. The sentence is filigree, leaf become ground. Demulcent concepts fall silently in cobalt forests beyond form. I am not another's story. I am not even my own self-concept. Thousands of minuscule false portraits we clutch may depart softly as rain returns to rivulets and capillaries, or discordantly as spines clash. In one skein of narratives, now tumbled from keeping, sinuous turns usher beginning. Sight changed. With left eye, I could no longer see into distances. A clock beside my bed stopped keeping time. Each day the numbers rove several hours, no matter how many times corrected. Usual entrances and exits became inviolable. A tree crashed close into the outline drawn of the family, a precursor filling the entire yard. Power lines fell, and yellow caution tape was born in prolific brambles along all perimeters of meeting. Red thread encircles neck and wrists. Remove prevarications from ethereal sight, and there place the changeless. Enter obsequious darkness until you reach the vast, the festival, the ear which guards, the eye garlands, the embrace which changes everything and nothing. All week, wait to be entwined. Light is too strong or sun is too high. We stagger dance a child's story. By night, pavement smiles graciously despite heat. We leave the place we cannot divine, shun seen in favor of private investigations. I watch your face as you sleep. What is not fair is like a fortress, leaves outside, windows inflamed. Hold exhalation, thousands of years. Loss liquefies pneuma. Ordinary pulse sounds in oceans we inhabit with no cognizance. With outstretched hands, we admire thresholds, fabled waters, interiors. Why poor vision in front of salience? Beacon of arrival is one entire life. This instant and this form connect to every instant and every form, but not in thought. Come here, embodiment, stand on this shore, which in fact is not brink or curtain or sand or stone. Those rocks on which we walk, discussing futures with hands like fronds, come to foremost red, turn to reliquaries, and later dust. What could our steps have foretold when embers end in umbilical moons? How could I have known you had not yet been born? Tears are necessary prisms for light falling over anyone's features until, in the middle of the night, thirst, thimbles, decibels. A midnight party out the window describes sound adroitly, covering entryways, gates of repose, sleepless streets. When I say no one found me, I'm obviously forgetting myself. I took the plummeting turn, which before had been merely a thought experiment, and learned that the temperature of home is not consistently rainfall, not routinely ecstatic, not for dabbling in the ephemeral. I took myself by no ocean, no reins, not even shoulders as gowns side against unclasped form, materialization of personhood from water allows sense to brink. Come home. I am speaking to myself. There is no other instruction. Newly born crystals traverse my face, lattice of retired features. Where are they going to plummet to empty their skins? The self was no self, sitting on a quiet bench, holding your hand. And how many dimly lit installations did we sit on a wooden bench in the late afternoon, in a gallery of confessions? We are always talking to one and another in order to listen and also to hear. Will you wonder at my writing while crying? I can't remember how. Ebullience. How to separate future from past when there is no future or past? how to include the unfolding petaled hypocrisy, how to relinquish thought as it descends around the body like night, sounds, windows, cicada seas rise and fall. One cannot ask any other because no one is other. I sit at the heels of the present moment. A memory with two hands combs hair lightly away from eyes. Violet cloud filaments end in arms as day thickens, coagulates sky. Tincture of time does not pull the needle from around her neck, does not attempt to mend. Do I know her? Will I ever know her? If I step away from this precipice, I remain in a maze of vessels and lungs. Will this trembling transfer beyond vestibules of rose, ascend toward orange blossom centers? Childhood? Practice has no sequel, yet draws air from paper mist, neroli holes of absent stars. I wrote this passage until the letters blurred, a cacophony of brightly illegible forms where the date proves ungent stop behaving as if time were a fiend. Instead, go, cross your name off every discarded view, depart from the limits of bound form. A day is not a conglomeration of clocks. Locate the version in which I am not parcel, post office, or even library, not a request, a grocery list, or a series of motions to make a bed. When time was a festival, cicadas arrive in waves bordering rain, where we revel. These words are not advice, not echoes, not remedies to fortune, not ballads, not sequels to moments lived. I was waiting for love as another language containing more meaning, as if it could exist outside myself, as if there were another language, as if the insatiable were separate, as if I were alone. So that's Practice Has No Sequel. And I'm going to finish with just a few pages from this embryonic novel. It's called Middle Body. And one reason I chose it when I was thinking about what to read today, I was thinking about everything that I've written since our world began changing dramatically is not quite ready. But I wanted to think about this moment. And so contemplative practice, to me, it's always helpful. Thus the other manuscript. And this one contains this part I'm going to read, a discussion about the meaning of the word distance, which seemed to resonate with now, even though this was written in January, the section I'm going to read. And it's distance as it appears in a tiny Emily Dickinson poem. So, Middle Body. In early January, I began making a series of tiny films. The first were portraits of sky. Then came portraits of ground. After that, portraits between sky and ground. One more series followed, portraits of satin. Each portrait lasts about 5 seconds. I connect the moving portraits, threading them into sequences. I decided to flip my usual routine of immediately writing when I woke, and instead to make the portraits first, because my meditation teacher, who does not call herself a teacher, gave me the assignment of changing one habit per week. It could be as trivial as placing the left shoe on before the right. The objective is to create new pathways in the brain. I made a list in a notebook of one habit for each of the next few weeks to change. For instance, altering the place where I practice sitting. I did this by accident yesterday, which doesn't count because my elder son was occupying my usual spot. Maybe you're wondering about the portraits of Satin, so I'll confess that that series contains clips of my rabbit, but so close up that the viewer only sees gray and white texture, sometimes still, other times moving. You might hear her chewing or notice fur rippling. This morning she pressed her nose up against my phone camera, but this is not visible in the clip. Her chewing is rhythmic, and a glimpse of her eye appears as she rapidly turns her head. Every day I attempt to translate this unspeakable passage, which is both an arc of becoming and also the trail between one fox and another. This thread regarding the fox will continue when I am brave enough to go into my basement and look for a painting. Here are my conditions. I must be alone and simultaneously confident that I am accompanied in this endeavor. Tricky contingencies considering that my movement or the movement of anyone's consciousness is so much like the fox, a torch and also hidden. The vantage with no agenda or even preference is highly elusive, and within that spacious unknowing, the fox appears. In a few moments, I'm going to drive my son to 30th Street Station as he is about to embark on his junior year abroad. I asked him if he wanted to participate in my portraits of hair. He said no. He has a luminous mane, wild curls to his shoulders. I'll have to ask him if he minds my mentioning our conversation here. I'll film my own hair, but it's easier and more interesting if I have portraits from many heads. They'll be close up, not showing faces or bodies, just textures and colors. Should this series be called Portraits of Falls? So many artists I admire include hair in their work. Sonia Clarke immediately comes to mind. Locks of hair exchanged in letters end up in exhibits, like that of Emily Dickinson's at the Morgan Library. I'm remembering that this thread is continuous with foxes since I became obsessed with this tiny poem. Distance is not the realm of fox, nor by relay of bird abated. Distance is until thyself, beloved. At the show, I encountered the letter Dickinson wrote to her friend Emily Fowler, signed and dated early 1850. She writes, quote, I wanted to write and just tell you that me and my spirit were fighting this morning. I dreamed about you last night and waked up putting my shawl and hood on to go and see you, but this wicked snowstorm looked into my window and told me I couldn't, end quote. The impulse of the poem, or in this case, the letter, is an impulse to send, to poem as a verb, as in an abrupt end to the spirit opposed by the elements. The poem, or the letter, or the word is the impulse which needs no hood or shawl to travel. I have so many questions about this poem. What is the meaning of realm of fox and relay of bird? What is the intent with the tangled syntax? Distance is until myself, beloved. Who is beloved? Am I asking here about my own distance from the fox painted in my basement, and the one I saw last night walking at dusk? Am I asking also about foxes as they appear to me in dreams? Circling back to the many kinds of distance, I imagine the following categories. Physical distance, such as between persons, or distances that a fox or a bird would travel, and distances between and within self. Are we inherently close to our own beings? Or might we be infinitely far from our most intimate aspects? Is this a poem to defy distance? A love poem? Relay of birds suggests carrier pigeons, birds carrying messages. Will the message reach the one to whom it is sent? Why then will distance not be abated? How can it be that distance in this context is neither real or imagined, nor remedied by flight, is an action? Is distance a verb, or is it a limit? We could say this poem is on the unreachable. One afternoon, recently walking near my home and hoping to see the fox, I imagined that interspersed and hidden in all of the fallen leaves were a myriad of minuscule foxes. I'm still writing this draft in which a narrator combs through all she's written, crossing everything out or replacing certain incessant, unproductive thoughts with symbols until they too fall away, and ultimately she is left with a blank page or the repeated action of scrubbing a document and then laughing into empty space. If I want to continue the invisible trail, which begins with portraits of sky and ground, and begins and ends in foxes, then I need some kind of process. One idea is to write the narrative of a woman composing a sequence from which she seeks distance. She believes that if she can contain one story on paper, it will be permanently affixed outside her body. However, the act of writing the story takes time, and each moment required in the task is another way of escorting herself back to disbelief or sorrow. She notes the story is not her, further, not her story, that it does not belong to her, and she does not belong to it. She wants her words not to speak for others, but to be aware of no one as separate, and that being the case, she wants to translate the reality stream in which no disconnect is possible. An impossibility. Difference is difference. We are different and alike, so long as we are not indifferent. She realizes that this problem, and even the slightly amusing image of writing about a woman who spends hours each day deleting, crossing out, blotting the word she has just inscribed, is also another way to be lost in a receding passage. She decides she does not want to be either the one obsessively telling the story or striking it out. She notes a third predicament. If she is the one who begins her novel with art making and tiny portraits of sky, then is she also trying to bypass or deny experience, because obviously that won't work. Maybe these are problems with time. In other words, not problems at all. Reality is in whatever she is right now, whether any of these acts or unimagined others. A person does not decide to be this or that. A person is many things and no thing. My narrator decided that none of those problems were worth attending, and that the best she could do was to allow whatever arose with as much attention as possible and try not to judge any of it. With image of sky, spaciousness, she began again, as if each morning and tiny film reminds her to look up, as if it were an electrical preface held intact by gaze. This brief unwritten novel is ideally confined to a finite strand of words. I searched everywhere for the sequence of letters and spaces. I wrote and rewrote, yet was not satisfied. Finally, I found the utterance. However, this dearly sought series of marks amounted only to one word, and this word at first refused to live alone, and so the utterance departed. The novel, or its representative, finally on its own terms, insists on remaining blank, sheer possibility. Therefore, what I attempt to compile here is a series of meditations encountering the inexplicable. Thank you all.